now 059.
059.
On track at this time, looking good.
Co-pilot, this is pilot.
Yes, pilot, go ahead.
Okay, how's the temperature over there? What's it running?
Right now, it's pretty warm. Lights are down.
The history of flight is seldom seen through the prism of human limits. But in fact, biological factors invariably set design limitations for the performance of a given aircraft. In the 1950s and 60s, as breakthroughs in propulsion and aerodynamics enabled engineers to build faster and higher flying jets, scientists, for the most part, working out of the public eye, went about the sensitive and sometimes Orwellian job of analyzing how human subjects coped with the new speeds and altitudes. Their work, called human factors research, involved controversial issues and sometimes troubling methodologies to answer vitally important questions. When did G-forces kill, for instance? Or how much radiation could a pilot safely absorb while flying in the upper atmospheres? What stresses caused a human to lose consciousness and thus control of the aircraft? And when did the close confines of a cockpit or capsule break a pilot down emotionally? Firm answers were understandably hard to come by, and in their place, superstitions, speculation, and oddball theories flourished. It was believed, for instance, that pilots would lose their powers of reasoning if they free fell for more than 1,000 feet, or that the sound barrier was an impenetrable wall certain to break apart any aircraft that tested its will. In both cases, nothing of the kind was true. But displacing folklore wasn't easy, and for the small handful of volunteers, the pains of human research were very real indeed. Most of the studies were undertaken by the United States Air Force, and on several occasions they condensed the many layers of interwoven and interrelated research into television documentaries. Many of these programs, though, tended towards self-congratulatory praise. Two programs, however, stand out as legitimate benchmarks. The first documentary was produced largely to justify the extensive use of animals in aeromedical research, although it gives a fair accounting of the contributions animal testing made. The narrative inflections and musical accompaniment, while dated, provide interesting insights.
The fanfare and the excitement are but dimly remembered now, though only a brief interval of time has elapsed since America's first space hero thundered skyward, riding in the capsule of a Mercury Redstone rocket. The date was January 31st, 1961, and from that moment on, history has been passing in high gear. But while new heroes are born every day, the nation still honors that bold pioneer who led the way in the best traditions of the great American frontiersman. Today, he basks in the glow of his memories amid the peaceful surroundings of the National Zoological Park in Washington, D.C. Astronaut Ham. Ah, fame, 'tis but a fleeting thing at best. Home to Ham, the space chimpanzee, was Holloman Air Force Base in the Tularosa Basin of New Mexico near Alamogordo. And more specifically, the section designated as the 65th 71st Aeromedical Research Laboratory. Here, Ham was trained and conditioned for his history-making flight in much the same way our human astronauts are trained and conditioned. And here, some 200 of his fellow chimpanzees are taking part in a program designed to probe the limits of man's endurance. to predetermine how well man will be able to adapt to the strange new environments he will encounter as he ventures deeper and deeper into the vertical frontiers of sky and sea. Because these primates are so remarkably similar to man in mental as well as physical makeup, they are ideal surrogates for man in tests involving potentially hazardous conditions. The close comparison exists in bone and muscle structure, in blood types, in the composition and functioning of the body organs, and in the capability of responding to stimuli and solving problems. Thus, data obtained from the chimpanzee may be extrapolated to the performance of a man under comparable circumstances. But it was not always that simple. Back in the 1940s, the Aeromedical Research Laboratory set out to learn the answers to some very formidable questions. The Earth was a familiar environment, but so-called outer space was full of new and unknown hazards. To gain more knowledge about the problems our astronauts would encounter, the upper atmosphere was first tested by a variety of stand-ins for the human space voyagers. At the White Sands Proving Ground, a missile test site not far from the laboratory's present location, mice and small monkeys rode out to the edge of space in captured German V-2 rockets. And later in the famed Aerobee rocket of U.S. design, to explore the wilds of weightlessness, acceleration, and cosmic radiation. As time went on, scientists of several countries sent up weird salvos of biological specimens, including radish seeds, fungus spores, grasshopper eggs, fruit flies, monkeys, mice, turtles, dogs, and cats. But despite the odd nature of their passenger lists, these men knew exactly what they were doing. Their investigations resulted in much useful knowledge. And at the Holloman Aeromedical Laboratory, Air Force doctors were acquiring the answers to some of the enigmas that had puzzled men since the days of Archimedes, Newton, Copernicus, and Kepler. Much still had to be learned, however, and man himself took over the test role in a number of important studies. In Project Man High, Major David G. Simons proved that it was possible to survive and to perform certain necessary technical tasks while enclosed in the cramped confines of a sealed capsule for long periods of time. It fell to the lot of two other Air Force officers, John Paul Stapp and Eli Beading, to demonstrate that men could withstand G-forces as they would be experienced during a rocket launch and re-entry. On the Holloman rocket sled, Stapp reached a top speed of 640 miles per hour and slammed to a full stop in 1.4 seconds. He suffered no serious or permanent ill effects from the 55G peak deceleration load he took. Beading subjected himself to an incredible 83 Gs in a later test made on the shorter Daisy track. Beading went into a state of shock and for a time was considered to be in a critical condition. 5 days later, however, he was back at work with no permanent disability. These and other intrepid human volunteers took risks at least as dangerous as those they had required of the animal subjects. And the data thus gained contributed significantly to the successful flights of Alan Shepard, John Glenn, and their successors. Over the years, the work of the Aeromedical Research Laboratory has broadened and increased, becoming more and more sophisticated as we move deeper into new fields of science and space exploration.
With the successful completion of Project Mercury, the laboratory examined how it might best utilize its assets in meeting Air Force and Department of Defense goals. Our chimpanzee colony was fast becoming the world's largest. Our Daisy decelerator and the associated tools in the field of acceleration research were unique. The comparative psychology group had gained valuable experience working with spaceflight problems. With these assets, it seemed logical that we should specialize in the study of high-risk operational situations prior to exposing man to them. Animal surrogates would be used to obtain data that would be meaningful in evaluating the danger to man. And in addition, our chimpanzee colony was a resource of great value in medical research. Accordingly, we launched a program of experimental medicine that included a comprehensive study of heterotransplantation, simian and human blood groups, and infectious diseases. New blood groups have been discovered and genetic differences have been shown in human white blood cells and platelets. A detailed study of the functions of the primate brain is now underway. Our goal is to contribute substantially to the military medical mission by making man's journey into space a safer one, and at the same time, to aid in the advancement of human and veterinary medical research.
The chimpanzees are purchased from dealers who import them from the jungles of equatorial Africa, and frequently their physical condition is less than satisfactory. Their first experience is puzzling, but not unpleasant. They are given a thorough physical examination in the laboratory's immaculate, well-equipped veterinary facility. Here they are treated with the professional care accorded human patients in a modern hospital, and often gain their first insight into the basic kindness of their fellow primate, man. These facilities serve a multiple purpose. Care of the animals is fundamental, of course, but beyond this is the requirement for establishing physiological baseline data on each subject, so that normal functions may be compared with any changes occasioned by the tests it will undergo later. Detailed medical records enable the veterinary staff to maintain a close watch on the health of each animal. Nearly every branch of medical research is covered in the separate laboratories, providing a far-ranging capability in the study of physiological conditions. The basic and applied research programs, conducted with up-to-the-minute equipment by specialists in their various fields, are benefiting all our armed services and creating great interest among the leaders in experimental medicine and psychology, both in this country and abroad. The animal's diet is a prime consideration. Appetizing meals are prepared in the spotless kitchen. A specialty of the house is the chimp cocktail, a tasty and nutritious concoction of vitamins, pablum, milk, and flavored gelatin, and one that every red-blooded jungle boy considers a real treat. When the newcomer to the chimp colony has completed his physical examinations and become accustomed to the routine, he is ready to begin his experimental work. Now, as man's representative in the research program, he is trained on certain basic performance schedules, using equipment designed and developed by laboratory personnel, in which he responds to signals by pressing levers and pushing buttons. The learning process is aided by positive and negative reinforcement, by applying a mild electric shock to the soles of his feet, which causes some discomfort but no pain when he fails to give the proper responses, and by rewarding the animal with a food pellet or a drink of water when he performs correctly. The performance task sequences are programmed in advance, using relay timing and switching circuits and electronic solid-state equipment, which automatically control the presentation of the stimulus displays and the recording of the animal's responses. Each animal's performance in this complex work program, designed to approximate human tasks involving the major senses, motor behavior, and difficult discriminations, is carefully recorded and maintained in a personal record. In the days to come, our astronauts will be asked to attempt more and more hazardous feats, such as working at complicated tasks outside their capsules or space station. What would happen if an astronaut were subjected to a sudden loss of pressure within his spacesuit? To find the answer to this question, the laboratory has undertaken a series of experiments with trained chimpanzees. Object: to determine the behavioral, physiological, and pathological effects of decompressing test animals to a near vacuum of less than 2 millimeters of mercury pressure. 2 days before the test, The animal spends from 7 to 8 hours in the decompression chamber at ambient or ground level pressure. Restrained in a form-fitting couch with physiological sensors recording such functions as heart action, brain impulses, respiration, and skin temperature, the animal does his chores in an environment that closely simulates the actual experimental conditions. His responses are recorded, establishing basic performance data with which to compare the results of the test to follow. On the day of exposure, the subject is first given a physical examination and then placed in the chamber. After the instrumentation has been checked, the door is sealed and the animal is denitrogenated by breathing 100% oxygen for 3 hours. He performs the tasks for which he was trained, and the results are measured and recorded. 30 minutes before a rapid decompression, the chamber pressure is gradually reduced to a simulated altitude of 35,000 feet, where again the animal's performance and physiological reactions are monitored. Full decompression is effected when this large tank, from which the air has been withdrawn, is opened to the test chamber. In 0.8 of a second, the simulated altitude inside the chamber soars to 150,000 feet. For all practical purposes, the equivalent of outer space. The animal continues to respond for approximately 15 seconds, and then is no longer able to operate the performance panel. Slightly more than 2 minutes later, the chamber is recompressed to a pressure altitude of 35,000 feet with 100% oxygen. After 2 to 4 hours at this altitude, the animal is once again performing at his pre-decompression level. Tests made thus far indicate that the average duration of total impairment in which no behavior is observed is 35 minutes, while the average time until total behavioral recovery occurs is 2 hours and 20 minutes. At the end of the recovery period, the animal is removed from the chamber. He has survived the experiment in good health. In fact, continuing tests show that he is able to perform as well as he did prior to the exposure, and no delayed effects have been observed after as much as 1 year. This research has been highly rewarding and has added to our understanding of a serious hazard the astronauts of tomorrow may have to face. And somehow, one gets the impression that the chimpanzee is proud of his contribution. Another experiment of interest conducted jointly by the Aeromedical Research Laboratory, where the animals are trained, and the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory, where the actual experiment is conducted, involves a different primate subject, this time the rhesus monkey. Its purpose, to determine the degree to which a physiologically dangerous level of radiation exposure will affect the ability of space crews to perform their required tasks while in flight. Again, the animals have previously been trained to do certain tasks on a performance panel. Their relative ability to accomplish the same tasks while under exposure to varying degrees of radiation provides data that can be applied to the performance of a man under similar conditions. Each monkey spends 30 days before a display panel like this, seated in a restraint chair equipped with a spring-supported board that allows him to exercise his legs. The test day is divided into 4 6-hour periods. 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. is a work period. The next 6 hours are devoted to rest, followed by another work period from 2 p.m. until 8 p.m. 6 more hours of rest complete the daily schedule. For the first 10 days, the monkeys receive no radiation. The data collected during this time are used to establish accurate baselines against which possible effects of radiation can be compared. In the second 10-day portion of the experiment, a certified 80 Curie cobalt-60 source generates continuous gamma irradiation at the rate of 50 rads per day. The total dose of 500 rads received by the monkeys would be considered lethal in man if accumulated over a shorter period of time, say in several hours. 4 lithium fluoride dosimeters implanted just under the skin on the back and chest measure the exact amount of radiation each monkey receives. The final 10 days are used as a post-exposure work period to observe whether recovery or adverse delayed effects occur. Early results have indicated that 500 rads of gamma radiation delivered at the rate of 50 rads per day failed to degrade the performance of the test animals in either accuracy or reaction time. The inference is that man may be able to tolerate substantial amounts of radiation and still perform efficiently if the dosage is received over a sufficiently long period of time, a definite advantage in civil defense, military, and spaceflight operations. On the field of pure medical research, the laboratory is conducting an interesting study in immunohematology with the aim of adding to our knowledge of the blood groups in man. Using immunological techniques, the specialists in veterinary medicine are classifying and cataloging the fine differences in blood properties within the chimpanzee species, which share blood groups O and A with man. Their work is expected to be of great value to the medical community. These are only a few of the many research activities currently underway at the laboratory. Prominent among the remainder are such projects as a study of visual acuity and thermal injury to the eye, using the Landolt ring technique to establish visual parameters, and a highly significant series of experiments in neurophysiology, in which both simian and human subjects are used to establish data on the effects of altered environments. Programs entering the laboratory are frequently conducted for or in collaboration with a variety of outside agencies. Many universities have been involved, as well as every branch of our armed services. The Defense Atomic Support Agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, the National Institute of Health, and other federal activities have shared in the work of the laboratory. But while the pathway to space may be lined with animal tracks, only man himself, in the final analysis, can determine exactly how far a man can go. Volunteers for human deceleration tests qualify on the small bopper sled. Powered by rubber cables, the bopper is capable of creating deceleration forces in the neighborhood of 20 Gs. The qualifying runs seldom exceed 10 Gs, however, and the men receive thorough physical examinations before and after each run. The bopper is also used for testing purposes with both animal and human riders. Graduates from the bopper may be called upon for more sophisticated experiments, such as a ride on the Daisy Track's omnidirectional sled. Designed to study the impact forces connected with a hard landing, for example, the Project Apollo capsule escape system, this sled permits testing with the subject facing in any desired direction and seated in almost any desired position. An advantage of the Daisy Track is the direct line instrumentation setup, a reliable and very accurate method of recording the test results. Information gained from these experiments will help in protecting the astronauts from physical impairment. The volunteer has taken part in a study of pulmonary functions before and after impact. The primary step is to establish baseline data on the subject, his maximum voluntary ventilation and pulmonary diffusion capacity, before he rides to a jolting halt on the Daisy Track. Impact or abrupt deceleration is an inevitable byproduct of increasing speed. The researchers are probing deeper and deeper into the human body to see what happens under these conditions. Is there a transient deformation of the lung that might impair, for instance, the efficiency of a lunar exploration team? Sensitive instruments in the hands of expert medical men and technicians are providing the answers to these and a host of other questions spawned by the space age.
Many, many more tests were conducted with animals. Dogs, for instance, were used to study the effects of rapid decompressions, the sort that might result if a space capsule was punctured by a small meteorite. The dogs puff up and regurgitate their stomach fluids, lose consciousness, and lay inert before the pressure is normalized and technicians revive them. Cats were used to study various restraining systems, and several drop tests were conducted to examine impact velocities in the range of lethal deceleration forces. Postmortems on organs and tissues helped pinpoint how G-forces killed. Monkeys were bathed in differing doses of radiation, the type thought to exist in the upper atmospheres. In rotating cages, they received high doses, and those that survived were observed for 100 days. Other monkeys rode centrifuges, and the effects of centrifugal force on their organs were observed through fluoroscopes. Notice how the heart and the intestines are pulled down. Bears were used for acceleration and deceleration sled tests. Mass, size, and weight are similar to humans. The peculiar conundrum of animal testing is that while it could go further than human testing, it could never go far enough. No matter how clear the results were, humans had to repeat the tests before the data entered the history books. To summarize its work, the Air Force produced an overview of human testing in the late 1950s. Careful to cast the studies in the best possible mission-relevant light, most of the situations shown here are tame and clean. This was not always the case.
In 1950, the Air Force launched an intensive study of the human factors involved in spaceflight. By then we had solved such mechanical problems as vehicle design, guidance, tracking, and re-entry techniques. Now, through 1960, we sought to determine if a 1G oxygen-breathing creature, accustomed to the protection of the Earth's atmosphere, could survive in the hostile environment of space. The problems encountered were both physiological and psychological. Could an active man function in spacecraft type high carbon dioxide content air? Dr. Bruno Balk and others of the Air Force School of Aviation Medicine exercised in a sealed chamber at 11,000 feet altitude on Mount Evans, Colorado. He breathed air that had been given a 12% CO2 content. Sea level normal is 1/30th of 1%. The findings of the experiments indicated that man could increase his ability to cope with high altitude through conditioning, and that space pioneers must possess physical stamina and great emotional stability. Weightlessness in space flight was given great attention. The human nervous system, blood circulation, and muscular control are normally adjusted to the influence of gravity at low altitudes, what we call 1G. Here, the absence of gravity was created in a fast C-131, flying a path in which for a brief time, centrifugal force is exactly balanced by the Earth's gravitational pull. The men are in a state of free fall. They feel no gravity. Psychological reaction to this strange state of affairs varied considerably. But the test proved that during the period of zero gravity, man could retain his ability to use his arms and legs. Potential astronauts undergo this experience of weightlessness. float in a crystal ball told the pilot of the C-131 when he attained the right speed and flight path to produce zero-G. In orbit in Mercury capsules, they will be in a weightless state for hours, not a mere 15 seconds. But here they begin to get used to the strange sensation of zero-G. Man's neuromuscular coordination in the weightless state was determined by studies in other flights. In an MC-2 full pressure suit, this man occupied a chamber designed to simulate the temperatures which the crew of a space vehicle would experience at hypersonic speed during re-entry of the Earth's atmosphere. Quartz tube infrared lamps raised temperatures 100 degrees a minute. As specialists of the Aerospace Medical Research Laboratory studied skin and body temperatures, pulse rate, and heart reactions. This helped determine the limits of heat stress on human beings and the protection needed in spaceflight. During the test, the chamber temperature was raised to 500 degrees. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, from 7 through 15 April 1960, Courtney Metzger, research scientist, volunteered to spend 7 full days in an airtight capsule in order to test life-sustaining space equipment in a simulated space environment. He communicated by squawk box with observers outside the capsule. As men must do in spacecraft, he took his food from tubes. The water he drank was under pressure. He maintained his muscular tone by exercise. Throughout the 7 days, the temperature, moisture, and oxygen levels within the capsule were recorded. In good shape at the end of a full week in the capsule, he was congratulated by Colonel John Stapp, famed for his historic sled runs at Holloman Air Force Base. Then there was a much longer test of how men will react to prolonged stays in the environment of space. From 15 August through 15 September 1960, Captain John J. Hargreaves and Captain William B. Hablutzel spent 30 days, 8 hours, and 21 minutes in a space cabin simulator at the School of Aerospace Medicine. They had a supply of 80 pounds of pre-cooked, dehydrated food and an oxygen system. They shared the duty of continuously manning the control panel 24 hours a day. And they ate, slept, and kept house in this 8x12 sealed cabin for a whole month. Outside the cabin, instruments recorded their physiological and psychological reactions. Findings of the long and trying ordeal indicated that men can maintain efficiency during extended space flights. At Wright Air Development Division, a spacesuit was developed to provide part of the protective and life-sustaining equipment that a space traveler would need. This man, in an altitude chamber, is not only wearing the full pressure suit that he will need in the near vacuum of space, but on his back he carries a pack that supplies him with oxygen by a new system. Hoses recycle his breath through the pack. Carbon dioxide and moisture are removed. Pure oxygen is added, and his breath is returned to him to be breathed again. A striking feature is that the equipment is free from attachments to the spaceship's own oxygen system. This means that the wearer could move outside the vehicle into space, taking with him the oxygen he needs. G-loads that men must endure during the acceleration and deceleration of space vehicles have been under study since the early 1950s and became a matter of general interest when Colonel Stapp made his famous ride in 1954. At Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, sled runs carried man and animals into extreme G-load conditions, more than men will ever be required to experience in actual spaceflight. During each run, instrumentation recorded data on rates of acceleration and deceleration and on the peak G-loads. It was not unusual to sustain G-loads from 25 plus to 45 plus. An extraordinary event occurred in 1958 when Captain Eli L. Beading of the Air Force, a program task scientist, took a perilous ride that subjected him for 0.04 of a second to 82.6 Gs. The limit of tolerance of G forces was proved to be high. Another significant factor explored during the 1950s was the effect of cosmic radiation on the space traveler. To verify information gathered in numerous animal balloon flights, Air Force Major David Simons in 1957 ascended to 102,000 feet in a semi-sealed cabin. He suffered no adverse effects from radiation. Men who go into space must be equipped to survive launch and re-entry G-load, long periods of weightlessness, low pressures, and other factors of the hostile environment in which he will find himself.
Human testing can be crude and painful. Negative Gs, the sort felt when you go down an elevator, are extremely difficult for the body to tolerate, but they are often encountered in flight. Negative G research involved invasive procedures designed to allow physicians to monitor changes in the blood flow and blood pressures. The test subject rode the centrifuge, rotating into a negative G position, that is, with the blood flowing towards the head, and on negative G drop sleds. The price paid in broken blood vessels is clearly evident. At some point, human factor studies exceed human tolerances. Sometimes it's by accident, sometimes by design. Perhaps the subject passes out, as these men do on the centrifuge, or shock sets in, as it did following this violent 82G deceleration test. Human studies are disorienting and dangerous. They are designed to find human limits in the laboratory before an emergency is encountered in the field, and that means risks are ever present. But the results are invaluable. Now pilots know when to bail out and when to ride out the shock, say of a broken canopy and 300 knots of wind in their face. They know they will regain their senses during an explosive decompression, despite how jolting it is at the onset. They know they will survive the physical ordeal of supersonic ejection, because a human volunteer proved they could. All this to replace panic with a reasoned response, to replace oddball theories with practical experience, and no matter how controversial, to find the envelope of human survival.